Hello everyone, this is Asghar Nazir. Today we will discuss about debugging. Debugging is a process of identifying and removing the issues from your code. But this is not the only reason why we use debugging. Sometimes we don't understand the code, how the code is working. We can also debug that code to understand why that code is generating a specific type of output or why behaving in a certain way. I will only be covering the basic debugging concepts like how to use watches, how to use breakpoints, how to evaluate expressions during the debugging. If you are looking for advanced debugging like debugging the multi-threaded code or using the conditional statements, please watch the second part of this video. So let me show you a demo so that you can understand how debugging works. To show you the demo, I have already written the code. Let's say this is the piece of code that I want to understand how this code is working. This code, if I run this code, it generates an output, and let's say I don't understand how I got this 75 here. I want to understand this. Right now, if I try to understand it from the code, there are so many steps and I have to kind of do the calculations in my mind or on a calculator to understand why I got the number 75. But with the help of debugging, I can see it step by step. I can slow down the execution of code. I can control the execution. So let me show you how to debug. The first step to debug the code is we need to place a debug point. A debug point or a breakpoint is where we want to stop the execution of the code. So let's say if I place the breakpoint where I am declaring this variable, I need to click on this area. I need to left click here, and once I see this red icon, it means the breakpoint has been placed, and now I can start debugging this code. So let's understand how debugging can help us figure out why we are getting this output 75. So to debug the code, first step, we need to place the breakpoint. We have already done that on line number 8, and some of you might also be confused that where we should place this debug point. You should place this debug point or breakpoint from where you want to see the execution slowly, step by step. And this time, instead of clicking on this run button that you guys normally use, you need to click on this debug button to enter the debug mode. Let me click on that, and now I have entered inside the debug mode. You can verify it from this line. It has been highlighted, and I see the debugger window here and the variables window here, and all of these buttons, they are active now. It means that I am in the debug session now. So now the intelliJ has stopped the execution, and now I control the execution. This is the button that I can use to go to the next step, and if I don't click on this button, it will not execute any more line. So let me click on this button that says step over to go to the next line, and now the debugging starts. As you can see, when we are in debug mode, intelliJ displays the values of the variables inside the editor. So here, if you focus, it is saying that this variable number that you have declared, it contains the value 10 right now, and after this line is executed, whatever will be the value of this number variable, it will be updated, and I can see it here. So what happened on this line, previously there was number 10 stored inside the number. I added 20 more, and that's why I see the number 3 here. So number variable right now contain a value 30. Then I am reassigning a value 30 again to the variable, and then I am saying 45 plus number. Existing value of number is 30. I add 45 more. So if I execute this, now I see that the value of the x variable is 75, which is generated from this number by adding 45 to it, and that's why I see the value 75 on the console. So this is how we can use debugging to understand a piece of code. Now this was a very simple example, and it might not make much sense that why we should debug the code. Let me show you more complex examples, and then it will make more sense. So let me go to the demo too, and let me show you how we can use the debugging to check how if-else conditions work. So again, let me place the debug point here, and then after I have placed the breakpoint or debug point, I go here and then I click on the debug. Again, I enter the debug mode. I click on this button that says step over, and then only the code will go to the next step. I come here. I see that this condition is checked first. The number variable right now contains 10. and I am checking if this number is greater than 20 or not, which is a false. And notice here intelliJ has also highlighted the code in gray. The code that is grayed out, the lines of code that are grayed out, it means they are not executed. These lines which are in a normal color, they will be executed. So because this condition is false, we know that Java ignores whatever we have inside the if and it goes to the else part, and then we see the output from the else part. So we can see with the help of debugging we have figured out why we got to this output. Now there is one trick when debugging the if else condition. Right now I have placed the debug point on line number 7. If I place the debug point on line number 10 and if I try to debug this code, debugging will not work. It will never enter the debug mode. The reason it will never enter, and we need to be very careful when debugging if else conditions. Don't place the debug points inside the if else conditions. If a condition is never going to met, for example this condition is false right now, Java is not executing this line, which means if this line is not executed, this debug point will never hit and we will never enter the debug mode. So always make sure that you are not placing the debug points inside the if else conditions. Always make sure that you place them outside of the if else condition. If you have placed it accidentally somewhere where that line of code is never executed, you will never enter in debug mode and you might get frustrated. Okay, why I'm unable to debug an if else condition? So this is very important. Let me show you one more demo. So let's say, for example, let me remove these comments. This is the piece of code and it's pretty complex. Somehow I'm calculating the salary after the tax, and if I run this code I get a certain value, and let's say I don't understand why I get this value and I want to use debugging to figure it out. So again, what I can do, I can place a debug point and then I can go step by step. But as I can see here, there are multiple steps which are happening on the same line. How do I deal with these kind of steps if there are multiple things on the same line? To solve this problem, intelliJ provides us with the watches feature. We can set watches. Watches are actually containers in which you can put your code, and once you reach that line, it shows you the output of that specific part. So let me debug this code to show you why we are getting that specific output. So I have placed the debug point. Next I click on debug, and now I go step by step with the help of this button that says step over. So I click on, I go to the next step. I see that their salary variable is declared and a value is assigned to it. Bonus variable is declared, a value is assigned to it. Actually I can see all the variables and their values. So now we have multiple calculations on the same line. And how do we deal with these kind of calculations? So what we can do here, we can use the watches feature. Focus here, this variables window, it holds all the variables and their current values here. So what I can do, I can click on add a watch, and it also gives me an option from here. So I can select this part from here, and remember we need to be in a debug session, and then we select the part, we right click, and then we select this option that says add watches. And you will notice that now intelliJ has another expression in the variables window which tells me that if you add the salary plus the house rent allowance, you will get 120k. So salary is 100k, house rent allowance is 20k, total 120k. I can create another watch that will tell me that what is the value of these calculations. Again, I have selected the complete expression, I right click and I click on add watches. So this time I see that okay, salary plus house rent was 120k, then I multiply it with 1 plus bonus, I get 132k. I can create another watch just to see the execution step by step. So no worries, even if there are so many calculations which are going on the same line, I can create these watches which can help me show these calculations step by step. And now if I select this complete expression, that's how I am getting 92.400. I can also do this. I can simply select this part. What is this 1 minus tax is giving me? I can click on add watch. This 1 minus tax is giving me 0.7, and this 0.7 is multiplied by 132k here, this multiplication, and that's why I get 92.400. So using the watches, even if there are million calculations on the same line, I can break down those calculations and I can see step by step what is going on and why I get a specific output. So let's see another little complicated example of if else conditions, the nested if else conditions. Here I have used multiple variables and I am writing some if else conditions, and if I run this code, I get the output, but I don't understand why I am getting this specific output. So let's use debugging to figure out why we are getting this output. So again, the first step, place the debug point, and then instead of clicking on run, let's click on the debug. And now I can see age variable has been initialized, chain variable has been initialized, and again I can use step over to go here. The first thing that I can see right away is that some lines of code has been grayed out by intelliJ, which means they will never be executed. So this line is grayed out, this line is grayed out, this line is grayed out, which means the Java will execute this piece of code. But as per my expectation, because the name contains the chain, I should be seeing this output. So let's figure out why I don't see this output. So I use the debug session. Let me bring it back. I click on the step over again, and now I stop here and I want to understand why it is not going inside the if part, why it is going inside the else part. So whenever I have to do experiments on a certain piece of code, what I can do, I can use another feature of intelliJ which is called evaluate expression. This button here, this calculator button here. So I click on it here, and now I can check this code, what this code is doing. So if I click on evaluate, I see that this code is resulting in a false. I can do multiple experiments. For example, I can try this C with uppercase. I click on evaluate, and now I see that it was this lowercase c which was making this condition false, and now I get it true. So this expressions window, you can bring any piece of code from your program and then you can do experiments with that part, that only that specific part. I remove the n, I click on evaluate, I get again a false. I put back the n, I again see the true here. So whenever you have to do experiments with a specific part of code, you can open the evaluate expressions window and then you can run that out. So now I have figured this out, that why I go inside the else part, because the c was in lowercase. So let me stop the debugging session and let me change it to the uppercase c, and now if I run this, I see my expected output. So next, let me show you how to debug the scanner class. This is a very simple example that I have already written. Let me place a debug point here. Let me click the debug and let's see what happens. So I come here, I click on the step over, then I see the output, please enter your age, and if I open the console here, I see what is going on in the program. I click on step over again, and now the debugger says application is running, all the buttons are disabled, and I don't understand what is going on. So remember guys, scanner class, it's treated a special way. It waits for the input from the user. If you are in debug session and if you have used the scanner class, if you are asking for an input from the user, unless and until you enter that input inside the console, you will not be able to debug further. So this is a trick inside the scanner class. Whenever you have to debug the scanner class and if you are asking for an input from the user, please make sure that you enter that input, then only you will be able to debug further. So now I have entered the value here. Now only I can go forward and I can debug the remaining code. So this was all about debugging. It was a basic video. I hope you liked it. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon, and I will see you in the next video.